Welcome to our study in the book of Romans. We're in Sonship orientation, and if you're looking at the notes, this is going to be session number 23. In our last session, we were looking at the two phrases: to know, to perceive, to understand, to receive, to all that kind of business. That's what we were looking at when we left off last time. So I want to get right into what we're going to be doing and use this as a springboard to get us into what it is we're going to be looking at today. When I was asking you to read those verses in Proverbs chapter 1, verses 2 through 6, and tell me what it was that you noticed about those, last week Gloria said, it looks like a table of contents. That's exactly what it is. Those two phrases are telling you, they're purpose statements. Remember we talked about that? They are purpose statements. And they're giving you the purpose or the things that are going to be accomplished in your sonship education. Even though this is the book of Proverbs, what that's doing is, it's giving us the purpose of each of these parts of our education so that we know what it is that's going to be done for us. Again, it's not giving us the doctrine, but it is telling us what it's going to be doing. So what we have, and I'm just going to run through the verses. I ask you to read and reread those verses, get familiar with them. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. Then, and these are going to come in order. I don't mean to flip through these so quickly that you lose what it is that we're after here. But the very first part of your education is going to be to know wisdom and instruction. Then you're going to be made to perceive the words of understanding. Let me just say right now, we have not yet defined what that means. We would look at that and say, well, those are kind of synonyms: to know wisdom, to perceive the word. He's using different words because he means to tell you something different. We are going to define those, but for now we're just listing through them. Thirdly, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment, and equity. Then, when you get that finished, the curriculum is going to take you to give subtlety to the simple, because those things will have then qualified you to be a simple son. We'll talk about that more in just a bit. To the young man, knowledge and discretion. And then, let me back up. If we're looking at the things that you are to know or to perceive or to receive or to whatever, I'm listing them here. You have 5 of them so far. Here's the next part of the verses. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. The reason I'm saying "and maybe" is because there is no "to" phrase here. But I do see that the wise man there is something being added to him. Look, a wise man will hear and will increase learning. So it could have said to increase the learning. I'm implying it that way. The scripture is right the way it says it. So I'm saying you could say there's a 6th thing here. There's one more. And that's either going to be number 6 or number 7. If you look at the list and go, no, I don't get that. Well then, okay, this last one's number 6. To understand a proverb. There's the 2 phrases. I'm kind of in number 6 reading that 2 phrase in. All I want you to see here is that there is a list of things that the 2s give us. And it tells us what it is that those 2s are going to do. So by the time you get to the end of verse 6, now those are not verses, I'm just counting the 2s in there. By the time you get to the end of verse 6, there in Proverbs 1, you will have been given the entire extent of the curriculum. That's everything the curriculum is going to cover. It's all in those verses. Now, that's exactly what's going to be done for us by our apostle. That is the extent of our curriculum too. So just to make sure that everybody kind of gets it, I want you to remember that because you see all of these things that it's going to do, it's going to cause you to know wisdom, instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of, because we called that complex purpose. In other words, more than one. Not complicated, complex. It's doing more than one thing. There's multiple things being done here. And so that's what I wanted you to see. Now, before we go on, I want you to think with me. Isn't it important to know the purpose of something before you start to go through it? Oh, rats. I had this little thing and I was going to bring it and I didn't do it. I had the perfect illustration. I am brain dead. Oh, that's officially on the tape. When I used to fly down here every Sunday and then fly back on Sunday night, the stewardesses would always come by. Once the plane got up and got at a cruising altitude, they'd always come by and ask if you wanted something to drink. And I noticed one time this stewardess, she had something on her, it looked like a ring on her finger, and she turned her hand over and she just pulled up and it popped that can open. But it just had a little crook thing on the top of the ring. And I said, "Where did you get that?" She said, "They sell them in the store where the stewardesses, there's all kinds of stuff for stewardesses." She said, "A stewardess invented this where you could just slip this on like a ring and you could just use that and pop the tops on those cans because we were always chipping, breaking our nails and doing stuff." And she said, and so the stewardesses, they all go in there and buy them, And now, here's what I know. Billy has always handed me her can. "Will you open that for me?" And I just had my nails done and I don't want to chip them up. So I said, what would it take? Why? How could I get my hands on one of those? I said, my wife would love that. And she said, "Well, here, just take this one." And I said, "No, I don't want to take that one from you." And she said, I've got 5 or 6. She said, "Really? They come in silver. They look like gold. They look like silver. They've done something with them. And she said, "Here, just take this one." So I brought it home and gave it to her. And I said, "Don't ever ask me to open another can." No, I didn't say that. I started to bring that and just pass it around and show it to you and say, "What is that?" Because the point I want to make to you is this. Until you know what that's for, it is worthless, isn't it? He says it's worthless. And so, until you know what this sonship adoption is going to do, this education, until you know the purpose of it, there's no sense for us to read the book of Proverbs or to go back over to Romans and go through Romans if we don't know the purpose, if we don't know what it is it's going to do. Now I'm going to make this statement another way, and that is to say this: we know what adoption is for. When we talk about adoption, what is adoption for? What's the big purpose behind adoption? Yeah. That's right. We're going to be able to be utilized in his business out there. Now, I'm just going to put labor with him because that's the thing that we're used to, but what Linda said is right. Now, here's the question you have to ask. If I've got to be educated to do that, and you do, what is it I have to learn in order to be able to do that? If somebody says, "Hey, I want to be a fireman," the logical question is, what do I need to learn? Because you can't just walk up and you're a fireman. You have to get familiar with the equipment. You have to know how things work. There's a procedure for safety and all that kind of business. Well, what I'm driving at here is this. If what we're reading in the first 6 verses really is the outline for the structure of your education, the curriculum, if it really is that, and look, I'm just going to step aside here and say this. I keep calling it the curriculum, and I know that you're not going to find the word curriculum written in Proverbs or in Romans. Paul is not going to say, here comes the curriculum. So what I have to do is, I am today, one of the things we're going to accomplish is I want you to be able to see for yourself that this truly is an educational curriculum. Even though the Bible may not use that word, that is what it is. And I'm using that word because we understand that word in the context of an education, and that's exactly what's going on here. I want you to see that for yourself, because I can't afford for you to have a doubt and say, well, Brother Mike says it's a curriculum, but I don't know, maybe, it might be, but it might not. I need you to nail that down now, because once we get in the curriculum here, once he begins to let you know wisdom and instruction, you have to be sure what it is you're involved in. And I can't afford for you to take my word for it. You have to know it for yourself. So, with that in mind, I'm going to just say that if I'm right about this being the basic structure of the curriculum, and if Proverbs really is laying all of that out for us, then doesn't it make sense for us to nail all this down? What is it we're going to have to learn in order to get qualified to labor with our Father? See, to me, that just makes sense. Now, and if you don't see that, or if someone goes to Proverbs and they don't understand that, there's really no sense in reading on through Proverbs here. In fact, there's no real sense in going back and reading through Romans. Now, it's at this point that I wanted to say something to you, because I want to make sure that you have this in your mind. I talked to Billy almost all the way in about this today, trying to find the right way to illustrate this. Because the natural thinking that you encounter is, look, I got saved, I'm not going to hell. That's what everybody thinks is the big deal. I'm not saying that's not important. It kind of is. But that's not what the thing was about. Look, go all the way back to Adam. When God created Adam, did he create him? As soon as he was created, did he need redeeming? No. We know, because of the background we've done, you know that God created Adam so that he could begin to teach him. He wasn't made like the angels with a built-in wisdom. God had to begin to tell him what was good and what was not good. Remember, he says to Adam, it is not good for man. You know what he's doing? He's educating him. And we went through all that, so I have to redo it. He's beginning to educate him. He is going to teach him about good and evil, but he's going to teach it from his wisdom. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is the counterfeit wisdom. And that's why he says, don't eat of that tree. It's not a test of obedience. He could have done a test of obedience by saying, don't ever sit on that rock. Don't ever do this. He could have done that 100 different ways. It's much more than that. He is talking about, let me teach you about what is right and wrong. What does the serpent do when he comes along? He says, well, God knows that in the day you eat there, your eyes will be opened and you'll be as gods knowing good and evil, and God's just trying to keep it from you. And, he's selling him on the bill of goods. All that thing. Eve eats and then she gives to Adam, and you know the story. Well, my point is this. When God created Adam, he made him so he could teach him his wisdom, so that he could enter in to this relationship with him, where God and Adam would have an intimacy of relationship, and God every day would be instructing Adam and bringing him along to show him how to begin to think. Why? Because he made Adam the regent over the earth, not Satan. That's got to bug you if you're the devil, that this thing is given dominion over all the earth and everything on it. Really? That? But see, the wisdom that this guy can have, if he sticks with it, will surpass the wisdom of the adversary, because he's going to have the very wisdom of his heavenly Father put in him. And that is greater than the adversary's wisdom. And so this is the reason that he makes him. When Adam sins, now watch this, when he sins, salvation now is not the end. It's a necessary thing in order to get man back to when God says, I want man to come to work with me and labor right alongside me and participate in the glory of what I'm going to do in this kingdom. That's what he creates man to do. But when man falls, God doesn't abandon his plan. Instead of saying, well, too bad, I guess you can't now, God says, okay, now I'm going to have to take steps to make sure that this really does happen. So what he does is he has to provide redemption. Now what we've been used to our whole lives growing up in church is get saved, get saved, get saved, get saved, get saved. I grew up in churches where every Sunday morning, I've been in churches where over 1,000 people gather every Sunday morning, and the message is to the lost. Every Sunday morning. Even though there's 1,200 saved people sitting out there, we're all listening to a message that is not intended for us at all. And the whole message is to the lost. Now someone will say, well, they're just evangelistic and they want to see folks saved. I appreciate the fact. I've led a lot of folks to Christ in my life. I appreciate the fact that we want to see folks saved. But what I'm telling you is because of that, we get to thinking that salvation is the end. It's not the end. It's the means to the end. It's a necessary thing because we're in sin. We have to be saved so that we can still wind up with this great purpose. Remember we looked at in Galatians, to redeem them under the law that we might receive the adoption of sons. The reason for redemption is so he could still adopt us. It's a necessary step. It's not the end. And so when you think about it, is salvation the only thing you need in order to be adopted? It's not. What else do you? Give me something else you have to have before God can utilize you in his business. What else? Yes, spiritual fitness. And you know what spiritual fitness is made up of, right? Perfect justification and perfect sanctification. He had to give you those. The justification takes care of your sin problem, and the sanctification takes care of your service problem. But because you've now been made spiritually fit, is that the end also? Is that the end? No. He gave you all of that so that you actually could go back to where Adam was. And what was that? Be educated in your Father's wisdom. He'll take what's in his heart and write it on your heart so that you can begin to think and live like your Father, to qualify you to one day labor with him in his business to such an extent that he could put an area of his business in your hands and walk away and know that how you're going to run that business is exactly the way he wants it run. Now that's what he's after. And all salvation and all that justification and sanctification, all that is about is getting you back to that place. Now you understand what Satan does Satan, would he love for people not be saved? Of course he would. But if you're going to be saved, then let's just make salvation the big issue and leave it at that. That way you're never trained as a son. You never fulfill the purpose of adoption in the first place. So you know what? He'll make sure that in your lifetime you don't hear any sermons on adoption. You'll hear sermons about salvation. And then if it comes to serving God, you know how He'll give that to you, don't you? He'll serve that up to you in the form of the law. He'll give you a list of rules. He'll tell you that's how you serve God. Because He knows that will never produce what it's supposed to. He knows that. But the flesh loves it. Makes us feel good. It's that infirmity of our flesh. It's what we naturally gravitate to. It feels right. So boy, Satan really has this thing knotted up. Now, the reason I'm going through all this is because I want you to see that what God was after from the very beginning wasn't redemption. That's not the big thing. That's just a necessary thing to get us back to where we were. I've told you before, the big issue is your adoption. That's okay. Now, so what we're going, now I have some other things to say about that, but I'm going to get off of that for a minute, because what I want you to see is all of this is not just academics, but everything that you're looking at here, everything that we're talking about here, is exactly what you're going to experience over in Paul's epistles as he begins to take you through the education. And because of the words that he's going to use, you're going to get familiar with the structure here. So when you encounter it over there, you'll know exactly where you are in the education. You'll know exactly. And by the way, I'll answer this question for you now. Someone asked me this, and I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was someone here, maybe it was on the phone, I don't remember. But they said, when you're going through the education, will you know what we do is, when we graduate folks, we have graduation deal, we put on the cap and gown, you get the diploma, and you know, I did it. But because this is a work that happens in our inner man, they're saying, will we know when we become a simple son, or will we know when we become a young man? Will we know when we become a wise man? And I said, you'll absolutely know. In fact, the danger of it is you'll not only know exactly where you are without any doubt whatsoever, but once you get that first level of your education, you'll not only know where you are, you'll know where other folks are too. Now, I'm saying that's a dangerous thing, because then what Satan wants to do is for you to be uppity about it. Oh, well, I'm a simple son, and I know they're not. Well, that's just like a simple son. To think he's got some knowledge someone else doesn't have, so he must really have it. And the real issue there is, in fact, the Bible's going to talk about it, he just knows enough to be dangerous. That's all. He knows enough to really just get himself in trouble. But anyway, we'll kind of do that. The thing I would just want you to see is, this is the reason that Christians get totally confused today about what is really going on. Because they don't see their sanctified life as any big deal. Preachers really don't preach on sanctification that much. They think getting out of hell is the big deal. And once you think that's the big deal, you know what you say then? Then you say, well, look, I'm saved. I'm going to heaven. Why in the world do I need to go through all this? Right. That's right. What I'm trying to show you is the big deal to your Heavenly Father is this. So I was trying to find this illustration, and I came up with several bad ones. So I won't waste your time with those. But I'll tell you the best one I came up with, still lacking. But let's suppose, well, let me just ask you, why do people have children? Let's set aside the fact that the couples that go, uh-oh, okay, one's on the way. All right, they want their name to live on, don't they? And they want the family to continue, right? And if you have anything of significance, you know where you want that to stay? in the family. Sure. You want something, you want someone, there's all of those things. She's talking about legacy. I'm saying that for the tape so they'll hear. Those are things that we say. And by the way, can someone say, I love kids? I want kids of my own. I think that's really something that's in moms more than it's in dads, but I don't, and not that dads can't love kids. I do love kids. In fact, if it was up to me, I could sit at the mall, or I could sit at Walmart on those benches in front of those checkout stands and watch those kids come through the line with their parents. I love to watch those kids, mainly because they go home with their parents. But, you know, I love kids. I think that's, you know, they're just great. You ever seen that commercial on TV where the guy is saying everybody would like 50% more money? Talking about some kind of I can't even remember what the commercial's about now. And he says everybody, but 1% doesn't. And so he's got this little baby, and he goes, don't you want 50% more money? He goes, no. And he goes, but it's more money. And the next thing you know, Cheerios are hitting him, and he's spitting Cheerios out. And then here comes the fire extinguisher, and then that little boy gives him that look at the end. See, I love that. I'd watch that commercial 50 times to see that kid's look. I love that. Reminds me of my own kids. But anyway, the thing is that, now why did I even get off on that? Oh, I remember. You can say, I love kids. I want to share my life with these kids. I want to put me in my kids. I want to share the moments of joy in their life that I've had in my life. I want to be there the first day they go to school. I want to be there when they graduate. I want to be there when they get married. I want to be there when all those moments that brought you joy, you want to turn around and see those, you know, with your kids. Okay. I mean, you could say that. So when the time comes that you then hear the news, like my son called the other day and said, we're expecting big news. I said, do you know what it is? He said, no, it's too early. We don't know yet. Now, I always say to my kids, don't tell me if it's a boy or a girl. I want to be surprised when it shows up. That's just me. I like that. Everybody else wants to know what it is early. I don't want to know. Well, anyway, they're expecting. Now comes the part for the next, you know, however many months are left for them. I think he said they're like 10 and a half weeks or something like that. Well, now will come all those times when the baby is born. When the baby is born, do you think it would be okay for them to say, okay, our job is done. They're here. Thank you. Clifford goes, it's just starting. That's right. And in the words of Rodney Dangerfield, then you understand why tigers eat their young. Okay. Okay. This job is just getting started. Well, look, if you say, hey, I'm saved, that's it. You know what that means? Okay. They're, you know, the equivalent of being born. So now we're done. Hey, I'm on the planet. That's it. That's not it. And that's what I'm trying to get across here. Not that I don't think anybody in this group doesn't understand that, but I want to make sure everybody that watches or listens on the internet understands that this whole thing, you can't cast it aside to say, I'm not, you know what, I'm saved, I know I'm going to heaven, why do I need all of this? Because all you did was get yourself at the starting gate. This is not the end. It's just the necessary step to get you so that you can get started. And I'll just say one more thing about this, and that is most people think, look, if I'm saved and I got a pretty good life and things are going pretty well for me, I don't really need anything else. And that's how American Christianity views what's going on that's important. That's what they're looking at, because they make all of that the equivalent of God smiling on me. I'm got money. My cars are not broke down. I'm living in a good house. I'm, all those kinds of things are happening, and they're thinking, hey, I'm saved. This is all I need. None of those things. And they even say, hey, I go to church. None of those things are what is important to the Father. He's not after that. That would, most folks, that's what would empty this. If we had 1,000 people here, that's why when I got through with this sermon, this is the only ones that would be left. Because God is not near as interested in whether or not you're driving a BMW as He is about whether or not you're being equipped to labor with Him. That's the issue with Him. Now, I'm not saying God doesn't care about us or what we're going through. I'm making a comparison. And so anyway, I gave you that illustration to try to say that. All right, so now here's what I want to do. I want to show you that here's the progression. The very first thing that He's going to do, wisdom and instruction. I want to make sure I'm right. The first thing you're going to get in your education is to know wisdom and instruction. And I'm going to tell you now, you are going to get that right off the bat. That's the first thing we're going to do. But what we're doing here is discovering these purposes so that you know what they are. There's something about this phrase. We'll come back and look at it. But it's not just saying, no, like, well, there is some wisdom. He's talking about something else. And when he says wisdom and instruction, he has something specific in mind with regard to that. The second one is he wants you then to begin to perceive the words of understanding. Perceive the words of understanding. Now, you know what perceive means? Perceive normally means to be aware of something. But he's not just talking about be aware that there is such a thing. He is talking about perception in a little bit different way. Again, we'll come back and see what that is, because that is how you'll discover what it is he's trying to do. Then you're going to receive something. Now I'm going to abbreviate here, and that is to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment, and equity. Now, for me, if you look at those verses, in fact, they're in the PowerPoint, but I've got them up ahead. So if you look at those verses, I see a break here. And the reason I even point this out is because what we have to do today is we have to determine how many levels are in this education. What's it going to take to complete our education? There's a beginning to it, and there is an end to the curriculum. Now, I suspect that we will be involved in this education our whole lives. But there is an end to the curriculum. Your Bible is not trailing on in a book so big we can't, find the end of it. Is it now, if you go back through it the second time, will you find things you didn't find the first time? Well, you already know the answer to that. But there is an end to the curriculum. You can, and God willing, will become fully educated sons and daughters. Oh, I hope when I say that you understand what that means. In God's government, I want to talk about this. It's just going to get me off track, and I don't have time to do that. There are 4 divisions and 7 levels of government, and you guys are going to be seated somewhere in that, because that is the decision-making. Those are the people that make it happen. Those are the people that are carrying out what they know their Heavenly Father wants done. They're the ones that are sending it all down and overseeing the work to get that done. You folks are the folks among the very few that are going to be seated in these places. I'm not going to talk about that breakdown of that yet. We'll do some of that when we get back over to Romans 8. Well, let me just continue. I see a break. Does anybody else see a break here in between these first things? But let me show you how I see it. Here's something you know and something you perceive, but when you get to this, suddenly it's something you receive. Now, it's something that I see something different happening in that. Now, if you do, great. I'm not going to beat a dead horse over this. If you don't, okay. But to me, I see something different. And this is going to make a little bit of a difference in how we view the education. So I'm just telling you what I see. If someone says, when you come in, when you go to college and you have orientation, you come in, they tell you a whole lot of things. That's really not you getting your education. That's them preparing you so that you can. So you'll understand how this is all happening. So it'll make sense to you. Well, that's how I view this. And what you're in now, remember what we've been calling it? Sonship orientation. What you're in now is the part where you sit down and it all is laid out so it'll make sense to you, so that as you start doing it, you'll already know. I know where this is going. I know what it's going to do in me. I know how I'm supposed to respond to it and all of that. And then you begin to receive the instruction of those four things. And I've already told you where those things come in. Now, the next thing that you do is that you get something else added, and that is you get, I misspelled that. I always misspell subtly. S-U-B-T-I-T-L-Y? Subtlety. There, thank you. Okay. You get subtlety added. But once you complete these, okay, now they're in an order. You can't go to this until this one's done. When these two get done, then you receive this. When this gets done, then you're going to get something added to that. You're not ever going to do away with it, but you're going to get it added. And that's called subtlety. Then something that's going to get added to that, and let's see. I know I don't want to put that in yet. I've got those lines up there, but I'm going to reserve before we fill those in. And that is going to be knowledge and discretion. Then you're going to get that added to what you have. And then you're going to get this. You're going to increase learning. Now there's something that's going to go at the very top of that. I'm going to reserve that just for a moment as well. Now what I'm trying to show you by putting it up here like this is there's an order to this. You can't just jump in up here, because there'll be too much you don't understand and it wouldn't do you any good. So what I'm telling you is what I've just put up here, that right there, is going to match up perfectly with the education that Paul is going to give you in the book of Romans. It is exactly the way that's going to happen. Now, if you're going through, you know what? I started to bring this too, and I didn't do it. Have you ever picked up a textbook from your old school days and thought to yourself, you know, I used to think this was a novel. Do you ever pick up a math textbook and confuse it with a novel? You ever pick up a science textbook and say, oh, this is fiction work. This is just my writing a story about, some fictional. What is it that you know makes a textbook different from every other kind of book? You would never confuse your math textbook with a biography or a history book. with some fiction word. How do you know the difference? Oh, okay. What are you saying, Gloria?
It's a series of instructions.
Okay, there's a series of instructions. What?
Some basics at the bottom, and each one
Very good. Okay, but Bertha's saying you're starting out in the basics and you're moving up from there. What else? Oh, okay. Exposure. What'd you say? Okay, learning.
Questions.
Do you have to do something? You do. There's something to do with a textbook. What else? Okay. Now you've hit almost all the things that I'm looking for here. We're going to close this session off, but I want to leave you with this. You've hit almost everything that we need. When you pick up a textbook, you see things laid out in an order. They start from the basic, and they move you along. And if you're in a textbook, you would expect to see whole sections or chapters or whatever dealing with each particular step that you're looking at, right? And it would progress you along. When you look at this. To know wisdom instruction, even though we haven't totally looked at what all that means, to perceive words of understanding, then to receive this, then to add subtlety, then to get knowledge and discretion, and then to increase learning, and this last one is attain unto wise counsels. Do you see a difference between this and this? Can you see a progression? Now what I'm trying to get you to see is what got laid out for you here is exactly what you'd be looking at if you looked at the table of contents at a textbook. No novel does this. Nobody does. You know, when they do a history of the U.S., you know what they do? They start with how this country got formed. They don't jump into President Kennedy's assassination and then work from there through the history of the country. You have a logical starting place and a progression that's natural and it makes sense. And you see how this event led to this event and how that led to this. You see that. What you're looking at here is just that kind of thing. What I'm trying to say is, and doesn't Proverbs read differently? When you look at those, we talked about Proverbs being a teaching style. Well, when you look at Proverbs, I'll just do one here. The wicked worketh a deceitful work, but to him that soweth righteousness shall be a sure reward. Isn't that different from, and the angel of the Lord said, you know, you'll bear a son, and Sarah laughed, and the angel said, you'll call his name Isaac because you're not being instructed in a curriculum there. There is a historical record being given to you, and it does have value to you, but that is not a textbook. That's not a curriculum. You would never confuse it with that. What you're looking at, what he's laying out for you here at the very start of Proverbs, that for the next 9 chapters he's going to lay out in detail. What you're looking at is an ordered curriculum that does just exactly what all of you said. And it starts right here, and it has measurable steps to it. And it has a logical sequence to it. Now, what am I trying to do with this? I'm trying to get you to see that the very things we're looking at are the things that belong to a curriculum. Just like school. Yes, you should be. I'm glad Bertha said that. You should be able to identify. And you know what? There ought to be markers. And how do you know when it's time to move on in school? What do they have you do? They have you take a test, don't they? And when you show that you've mastered that material, then you're ready to move on to the next level. Because obviously, let's face it, you know what? If you really don't have down multiplication and division and adding, subtraction, it really won't do you any good to get into algebra. So here's what your Father has. He has all of these places where He's going to check you out. We've talked about markers of things you're supposed to know. Remember? Knowing this, that our old man is crucified. Remember we talked about all those knowings. They were markers to say, do you see this? Do you see this? Do you see this? And when we get back over to Romans 8, what he's going to do at the end of that chapter is give you 5 probing questions that only you are going to be able to answer. We're not going to answer them in here at all. I'm going to show them to you. You're going to understand what they are. And then you're going to go home and you're going to answer those questions to your Heavenly Father. And those 5 questions are meant, they are of such a nature that you can't fake it at that point. This is going to be like open heart surgery. He is going to put you on the table and open you up and reveal what is in you. And He's going to ask you 5 questions. And it's not that He's trying to flunk you. Your Father's rooting for you. But He has to make sure that what you need is in you. It is at that time, a couple of things will come into play, and one of them will be, I'm really glad we took the time to do the things that we did because this day was on the calendar. Wow. Now, I mean, that day you will. And when you get done with those questions, then your Father is going to say to you, well, I'm ready to move you to the next part. And I can identify that part on that chart right there. I can tell you exactly where that is. And He's going to say, well, I'll tell you exactly, because this is going to take place in Romans chapter 8, and this is going to take place in Romans chapter 8, and it's at the end of Romans chapter 8 that you're going to be answering those 5 questions, and before you'll ever begin to do this one, you're going to go through those 5 probing questions. And as a matter of fact, just to make sure, when you get over to chapter 12 and you really begin to see that, before He ever just throws the book open and starts telling you, He gives you one more checkpoint in the first 2 verses that you have to say yes to Him about. Because if you're not willing to say yes, then that work didn't get done in you. And He's going to you're going to have to go back and get that work done in you. That's why it's not academic. It's something that has to really be produced in your inner man. And then He starts giving you that one. And you'll know in Paul's epistles exactly where this stops and where this starts. And you'll know in Paul's epistles where this stops, and you'll have done it, and this starts. And there's checkpoints all along the way to make sure that's in you. And He's going to show you, you want to know if this is really in you? You know what? There's some circumstances you're going to encounter in your life, and you're going to get a chance to show if this is in you. That's why I say it's going to be real hard to fake it. But it's exciting, isn't it? Because He didn't devise the program like many professors for you to fail. He devised the program for you to succeed. Now, there is someone who wants to talk you out of this because he knows what you have a chance of becoming. You have a chance of becoming what Adam had a chance to become before he fell. You have a chance to get a greater wisdom at work in you than Satan himself, who was created full of wisdom.